Hey everyone, I'm going to be presenting on my AIPI 510 project of data exploration and analysis. So the data set that I looked at here was the publicly available Kaggle data set called the Big Data Set of Ultramarathon Running, consisted of over 7 million race records registered between 1798 and 2022. Of those 7 million race records, around 1.6 million were unique athletes. So lots of data here, meaningful data that we can use to explore and tell compelling stories. So, what I wanted to start out with is just, when you think about long distance running and ultra marathon running, you think of these elite ultra fit athletes. However, when you look at the data, it actually tells a different story. What we see when we look at this data, and we're just going to skip over some of the top to because we're short on time. We're going to analyze the top 3 race events, which is the 50-kilometer race, the 100-kilometer race, and the 50-mile race. If we look at this data and we actually look at just the time window 1950 to 2020, because prior to 1950 the data was a bit inconsistent and sparse. If we just look at 1950 to 2020, we see that times are decreasing from around 1960 to, I would say, 1970, 1980, 1990. Around this window here, times are decreasing. And the reason that happens is because these elite athletes are very specialized, and ultramarathon running is only really available for these qualified elite individuals who have the resources to take part. And so year after year, they're getting stronger and they're getting faster. However, we see a dramatic U-turn. So times actually get much slower after around 1980 and 1990. And this is very surprising. You would think, these elite athletes should be getting faster. They should be getting more talented. But what we actually find has happened is that there was a running boom around the 1970s. So this was sort of sparked around Frank Shorter's 1972 Olympic marathon win. So, many people saw this on TV and were just dramatically inspired. And there was a running boom that happened where, you just had these average runners and ordinary people who just started to start running, and they got very involved. And so that is what I believe is happening right here, where you see this U-turn, is that ultra marathon running is becoming more adopted. It's becoming much more widespread, and it's becoming much more acceptable to the average Joe, as you would say, accessible to the average Joe. So we're going to verify these claims by actually diving deeper into the data. So we believe that around the 1970s, 1980s, there was a running boom resulting in widespread adoption and slower finishing times. Let's look at how we can verify that. So if we look at total finishers over time, we'll see that there is a dramatic increase around 1980, 1990. The numbers just go absolutely parabolic. So for the 50-kilometer race, you have over 150,000 people up into the year 2020. We all know what happened in 2020, coronavirus pandemic. You see these numbers are just bombing downwards. However, it does come back. The people can't stop running. They want to be involved, and they're getting back after it. So yeah, I mean, what we see here is just a sharp increase in total finishers starting around 1980 to 1990. So no longer is the sport just reserved for elite, highly qualified athletes, but it's more widely accessible. More people are getting involved, and that's actually resulting in these slower average times. But as we'll see, this can be further verified by looking at the age finish time distribution. Sorry, we'll get to the age distribution, but the finish time distribution. So further with the claims, we should, if we believe that, more average people are running alongside these elite people, we should see much higher deviations in the average times. And that's exactly what we see here. So we can see around 1960, 1970, there's just hardly any deviation in these times. People are running these around 4 to 6 hours. This is for the 50-kilometer race specifically, 4 to 6 hours. And then around 1970, 1980, you just have much higher deviations all through 2020. Along with that, we see that the mean average finishing times just slowly go upwards, similar to what we saw in our first graph. But I mean, you go from people running very, very similar times to huge deviations. You know, in 2020, we have people running in 14 hours all the way down to 3 hours. So you have everyone from elite runners all the way down to your average people getting involved in the sport. Next, we're going to look at age distribution. So same sort of thing is going on. You have much more widespread age groups that are getting involved. And another interesting phenomenon is that you have much older people who are getting involved. So, you know, in the 1950s and 60s, it goes from around 25 to 30 years old all the way up to 40 to 45. So more people are getting involved, older people are getting involved. You know, if they're up to 50 years and beyond, that could also be contributing to the slower average times that are happening. So on top of that, we see a lot more countries getting involved from 1950, 1960, where it was only around, you know, 10, 20 countries. We see 140 or so countries. More people are getting involved. More people are taking part in the sport. So that is what's going on here, is you have just a widespread demographic of individuals who are running these races. And so what happens is these average times are slowing down. So I guess the dilemma here is that, you know, if you think about this, is the sport better now that it's slower and more inclusive, or is it worse because the focus on elite performance is diminished? I would argue that the focus on elite performance is not diminished, however, because this is actually a testament to, you know, humans are getting involved. They're wanting to set these high and lofty goals for themselves. They're wanting to surprise themselves. And that's just a very inspirational story. And there's always going to be room for elite performance. But what's special about the ultramarathon sport is that you have such a wide variety of people getting involved. So it's a human success story, what we're seeing here. And people are down to push their limits, and the sport is welcoming that. There's no barriers to entry, so anyone can get after it. I do just want to quickly mention bias is, you know, some of these regions can be underrepresented because the data can only be collected from wealthier countries with good timing systems. But overall, this is a very interesting data set to look at, and I hope that this presentation proved to be insightful. Thank you for tuning in.